there's a big concern in Taipei that China, which is on the back foot, which is economically pressed, may lash out. Um, I believe we've seen peak China, for want of a better word, into economically, and peak China is potentially a more dangerous China. There have already been reports that Chinese customs have been putting restrictions on the export of equipment with Apple and other US companies have wanted to shift to India and Vietnam as part of their diversification of supply chains. It is true that this outward investment, especially in Southeast Asia, which has been targeted by China, increases their clout, their political clout, geopolitical clout in those areas. But we've also seen statistics that for the first time, the net flow of foreign investment is out of China rather than into China, which will be alarming to the Chinese government. It's also the case that although a lot of the companies moving from China, Chinese companies, are doing so for geopolitical reasons, to shift, to avoid tariffs, there is a sense that they also see the writing on the wall in China. They see the severe economic problems that China is encountering. They see a government which is less and less market friendly. They see a government which has disappeared leading entrepreneurs. They see a government that imposed draconian controls, worse, more severe than anywhere else in the world during COVID. So there's a sense that Chinese companies themselves are sort of de-risking from some of the worst excesses and of the Chinese Communist Party. And so if you're sitting there in Zhongnanhai in Beijing, it is very much double-edged. Yes, these companies, particularly your tech companies, are standard bearers for China. The tech companies particularly are spreading the Chinese techno infrastructure abroad, which is very valuable for controlling many aspects of the countries they're established in, from the extraction of data to telecoms, internet, and other systems, which give you incredible power and influence. But at the same time, it represents a drain on the Chinese economy and confidence in the Chinese economy at a time when you are yourself going through sort of severe financial difficulties. And I've long felt that the Chinese economy is an accident waiting to happen, and is in far worse shape than I think even we realize today. And there is a realization that things are going badly wrong in China, but I do believe it's worse than that.
So is Trump missing an opportunity if the Chinese economy has come off its period of steep growth and is now sort of realizing that to consolidate the economy as it is at the moment, it's not built on the strongest of foundations. If Trump had gone for an aggressive free trade approach with American companies seeking to export globally and to sort of match China, would he have arguably had a greater impact on the Chinese economy than by going the way he's gone with the sort of protection of the US market through the tariff regime?
I think that is the case. I mean, tariffs are a very blunt instrument, which have all sorts of unintended consequences, political and economic. I think that such is the issues the Chinese economy is facing at the moment, both domestically and internationally, where they've cut back quite severely on their investment under the Belt and Road Initiative, which is sort of the umbrella they have for just about everything they do internationally, to more of an influence extender as much as an economic extender. But that's been quite seriously curtailed, particularly in Africa. The focus has changed. China is very overextended internationally. The economy at home is heavily indebted. The possibility of rebooting it is made more difficult by Xi Jinping's prioritizing of security and control over everything else. And I guess there are numerous opportunities for a clever policy from Western democracies, from America, to blunt Chinese power internationally. And I sometimes think that if you had a smarter approach at blunting China's power and influence, they are very vulnerable at the moment. And I don't think that sort of tariffs are a particularly clever way of achieving that.
Well, amen. I agree, and the danger is that exactly that moment when China realizes that the Belt and Road Initiative has is too expensive and that they've got too much dodgy debt with the countries that they've brought into the scheme, the US has just put itself in retreat with complete cuts to USAID and a reduced military and security contribution in the parts of the world where the Belt and Road Initiative is at its strongest. And so my sense is that this is the US missing an opportunity. But then when I speak to US Republican colleagues, they just think I look at it entirely the wrong way. I look at it from a global perspective of US competition in the world and the US wanting to be the global hegemon. And they just say that's not what Trump has promised to his voters. What Trump has promised to his voters is better quality of living within the US, more jobs, more prosperity, make America great again. It's not about whether or not the people of Uganda think that they would rather have a relationship with the US or China. That's not the deal. It's not like the Cold War where you're trying to establish ever more secure spheres and sort of push your rival out from their sphere of influence. This is an entirely domestic US focused thing. And that those of us that try and think of this in a more sort of global way are simply calling it wrong.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, and I think that plays into the question as well as to how performative this all is. You shout very loudly, you rattle the cage, but then how much of it is seriously followed through? In some respects, that doesn't matter because you've already sent your message. I mean, the Mexico and Canadian tariffs were a very good example of that. 25% tariffs, and Mexico and Canada promised to try and do better. I mean, it wasn't exactly a major concession, and the tariffs went. I can't see the same thing happening to China. He's linked them to fentanyl, and yes, China does supply precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels, and Chinese banks have been implicated in laundering money from those cartels. China did take some actions last year, but I don't think that's really what it's all about. And even if the funding and the chemicals were totally cut off, there's a bigger issue. But I think you are right. This is an American first president, an American first policy, and I think there is, I imagine, a difference of opinion within the administration. Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz have both have quite robust views on geopolitics and the importance of alliances, the importance of pushing back in multiple ways. So it's going to be interesting to see the way it plays out and to the extent to which a lot of this rattling of the cage is performative and how much of it is followed through. But at the same time, that may not matter if the damage is already done in the minds of people in Southeast Asia or in Africa, for whom this will merely confirm some of the sort of worst prejudices about the US.
Ian, I've got one last question for you. Perhaps the most concerning question of all. History is littered of examples of when trade wars became real wars. What prospect of this tariff imposition and the resulting fracture or sort of competition between the US and China moving from a trade competition to a military one?
There's the old argument, of course, that economies that are intertwined never come to blows, but I think that's been disproven on a number of occasions. I think the most immediate concern is over Taiwan, over the South China Sea, and the prospect for conflict or greater tensions there. If China concludes that if you're on the back foot, it's very easy to turn to nationalism and xenophobia. And I think that there's a big concern in Taipei that China, which is on the back foot, which is economically pressed, may lash out. I believe we've seen peak China, for want of a better word, into economically, and peak China is potentially a more dangerous China for all those reasons. It's a lot depends on what happens economically in China. I think that if there is a full-on trade war, China will be the loser because they have more to lose from a trade war with the US. The US is by far the stronger in that sense. Does that mean they conclude they have less to lose in terms of a conflict over Taiwan or in the South China Sea, which of course would be devastating to the world economy? So I think there is a danger. I'd like to think that a trade war is better than a shooting war, but I think the sort of tensions that it unleashes could play out in multiple different ways.
And it's a sobering but important note to finish on. I suspect that there'll be many people watching today who will have already clicked to buy your book so that they can understand more of what on earth is going on and the dangers that we face over the next few years. Thank you for joining me on Superpowers. You've been watching Superpowers with me, James Heapy. If you like this episode, you can subscribe to Times Radio. You can read more about tariffs in the Times, including Ian's great work, and of course listen to Times Radio for free, live updates for the latest. But for now, goodbye.